I'm at a loss for words. That's one. Whoa. Oh! That's just kind of sad.
She's putting cheese right in the toaster.
That's not a toaster oven, that's a toaster.
She's going to fit on your team perfect.
Welcome, ProStart Level 1 culinarians. Here we are on chapter number 10, Workplace Safety Procedures. This is Chef Hawks, and let's dive right on in. But let's first of all look at what is PPE, Personal Protective Equipment. So this is equipment that you may wear or that you may use that protects employees from potential hazards. Very often that would include things like fires and sharp edges, of which we have a lot in our kitchen. It's important that we avoid certain types of clothes, like loose or baggy shirts, jewelry, and scarves and neckties. We should have long sleeves. If you look at our chef coats, we wear long sleeves to protect our arms, aprons, and our chef jackets, dry mitts and gloves, because if you have wet mitts and gloves, they will let the heat just roar straight through. And then heat-resistant, knee-length aprons, non-flammable gloves, and then always check that PPE frequently just to make sure you're not getting any worn patches in those oven mitts or any defects or any damage that could mean that they are less effective. So the goggles that we can wear can protect us from splashing chemicals if we're having to clean certain things, and from certain things if we're using grinders, choppers, and mixers where items could be flying out quickly. Shoes. It's really important that we wear non-slip shoes that are fully closed-toed so that we're protecting our entire foot from anything that could be falling or spilling. Because remember, we have lots of sharp things that fall and lots of boiling hot things that can spill. We also want to make sure that we're not going to be creating a tripping hazard from what we're wearing on our feet. And that's why we have to be careful with what we select. So we want them to be non-skid, slip-resistant, low on the heel with sturdy heels, and no laces or tie up those laces really tight and do a double knot in them just to make sure you never trip over those when you've got something heavy, sharp, or hot in your hands. You want to make sure that they're water, heat, and grease resistant, closed-toed as we mentioned, and non-porous as well, so that things don't run straight through them onto the skin of your feet. So in general, this country looks at having to pay out about $246 million in property damage from fire issues that come up. Causes can be faulty electrical wiring and equipment or improper use of our equipment that we have. We should constantly be checking our establishment for any kind of hazards that are around that we could remedy before they turn into a catastrophe. So managers and employees should be taking precautions on certain things, and especially when it comes to doing scheduled regular cleaning especially on certain pieces of equipment that could be adversely affected. So we should always use a professional company when it comes to the larger pieces of equipment, things like hoods and things like that need specific professional care. Always keep flammable items from heat sources. In our kitchen, we actually have a safe which is fire rated, and that's where we keep all of our flammable things, just so that way they're completely safe and out of the way. We should always store linens and food in dry storage boxes, and make sure that you store paper goods away from anything that's corrosive or flammable. So what do we do if we actually have a fire? Well, first of all, we have to be able to identify what kind of fire we have so that we can identify what we can do about it. So the different types of fire have different types of categories. So what we have is class A, B, C, and K. These each require a different type of extinguisher to take care of those classes of fire. The wrong kind of fire extinguisher can actually have the opposite effect and possibly could actually cause the fire to grow even bigger and worse and more intense. Fire extinguishers are always labeled with their specific type of fire that they can handle. So a Class A fire is ordinary combustibles: wood, paper, cloth, cardboard, rubber, many plastics as well. So this could be anything in our dry storage, our dining areas, restrooms, garbage areas. We would use type A or ABC extinguishers for an A fire. Class B, these are flammable liquids. Flammable liquids are things like grease, oil, gases, and shortening as well, and pressurized cans, maybe some butane in a pressurized can. So these would be found in our maintenance areas and in our kitchens. We would use a B/C or an ABC extinguisher to take care of these problems. For Class C, this is electrical equipment. This would be if we had something with live electrical equipment having an issue like cords, circuits, motors, switches, and wiring that could be short-circuiting or having some kind of damage done to them. We would use BC or ABC extinguishers for this type of fire. And then we have Class K. An easy way to remember Class K is these are kitchen-type fires. This is for combustible cooking fluids, so oils and fats that we can have that can combust. So using a Class K wet chemical extinguisher generally will take care of these smaller fires.
So you've just caught a whiff of something burning. You run to the stove and see that your bacon has burst into flame. Thinking fast, you grab the fire extinguisher from your closet and spray the growing fire before it gets out of control. Luckily, it was the right type of fire extinguisher. Different fuels create different types of fires, and each one needs to be extinguished using a specific strategy. Depending on the chemistry between the fire and the extinguishing agent, the fire might go out, or it could actually spread. Fire comes from a chemical combustion reaction between oxygen and fuel. The fuel can be anything from wood to metal to grease. When it's heated to a very high temperature, what's called the ignition temperature, and when there's oxygen around, a fire starts. Then a chain reaction will add heat to the fire, keeping it going. Oxygen, fuel, heat, and that chemical chain reaction make up what's known as the fire tetrahedron. And a fire extinguisher works by removing at least one of these elements. Before fire extinguishers, people used water to put out fires because they knew that it worked. Water removes a crucial part of the fire tetrahedron, heat. But depending on the intensity of the fire and what's fueling it, water isn't always enough to put a fire out. That's why many countries have fire class systems, which categorize fires according to what they're fueled by. Fire extinguishers, meanwhile, are categorized based on which of these fires they can put out. In the US, the 5 main types of fires are A, B, C, D, and K. A Class A fire is one fueled by common materials like wood, paper, cloth, plastic, or rubber. And a Class A fire extinguisher can put out a Class A fire. The most common type of Class A extinguisher just has water in it. To put out Class A fires, water is all you really need. A Class B fire can be fueled by flammable liquids like gasoline or paint, or by flammable gases like propane. A water-based fire extinguisher can't be used on a Class B fire because the stream will just spread around the fuel and the fire. But any fire extinguisher that can block the fire's oxygen supply works well. Class C fires are caused by energized electrical equipment like appliances or motors. Water is not a good way to put out an electrical fire since the electricity can be conducted through the water and shock anyone standing in a puddle. Class A, Class D, and Class K extinguishers all contain water-based suppressants, making them both ineffective and dangerous for Class C fires. Carbon dioxide extinguishers, on the other hand, are perfect for both Class B and C fires since they replace the oxygen surrounding the flame with non-conductive CO2, effectively suffocating the fire without spreading it. Also, when the carbon dioxide leaves the extinguisher, it uses up some energy to expand, lowering its temperature. This super chilly discharge helps reduce the fire's heat. The most common fire extinguisher used in households today is the multi-purpose dry chemical extinguisher, which can put out Class A, B, and C fires. ABC extinguishers often contain monoammonium phosphate, a material that's also commonly used in fertilizer. Monoammonium phosphate leaves a blanket of non-flammable dust on the fire's fuel that separates it from the surrounding oxygen, smothering the flames. But even a dry chemical extinguisher can't put out a Class D fire, which is fueled by combustible metals like magnesium, titanium, sodium, or potassium. Machine shops that manufacture metal parts like nuts and bolts are at the highest risk of Class D fires, largely because their work produces so-called metal sawdust, shavings that turn into fantastic kindling when they're hit by a stray welding spark. Combusting metal reacts violently with the materials found in dry chemical extinguishers and releases toxic gas into the air. Plus, an ABC extinguisher's high-pressure spray can blow the metal dust and shavings around and potentially spread the fire. So if there's metal on fire, you're really going to want a Class D extinguisher. They're also called dry powder extinguishers, and they spray at a lower pressure so they don't spread metal particles around. And they contain graphite and sodium chloride, which don't react with burning metals. Instead, they work both by absorbing the heat of the fire and by separating the fuel from the oxygen. The last type of fire is Class K. Class K fires feed off of grease, oil, and fat. They're the kind of fires that normally happen in restaurant kitchens. The acid in many oils and fats prevents dry chemicals from creating a foam blanket to smother the fire, and water molecules quickly spread out when they hit hot oil, creating a steamy, fiery explosion. Plus, water can splash oil onto flaming stove burners, which could ignite and spread the fire even more. Instead, Class K wet chemical fire extinguishers contain alkaline compounds, or basic compounds. These combine with the acid in the cooking oils and fats to create a soapy layer on the surface of the oils, which extinguishes the fire. If it's hard to keep track of which type of fire is which, there's a clever mnemonic. Class A leaves ash, Class B boils, Class C has a current, Class D has dense materials, and Class K happens in the kitchen. Remember that, and you'll know exactly which fire extinguisher to use to save your...
An extinguishing system works by removing the fuel supply, denying oxygen, cooling the fuel below that combustion point, and disrupting the flame's chain reaction. Handheld portable extinguishers are only made to tackle small fires, no more than 3 feet tall or wide. Relatively small. If something's getting a little bit out of control, you need to ask yourself first, am I in danger? Because if the answer is yes, then it's not a good thing to try and tackle that fire. You should be heading out of the door and making sure that everyone else is doing the same. And make sure that you have it where it's marked with that specific fire type, and you don't try and attack a fire with the wrong type of extinguisher, because it can have a horrible effect. Let's take a look actually and see what happens if we use the wrong type of thing, in this case, on a grease fire.
Grease fires, the #1 cause of household fires all across the United States, yet most people don't understand how to extinguish them properly. And obviously, what this guy just did was definitely not the answer. And since so many homes are affected by these types of fire each year, we're going to take a couple minutes and break down this video, figure out what these guys did wrong, and possibly help save a few kitchens and homes and lives in the process. As you guys can see, that's how fast a grease fire starts. 1 minute, you're frying up the sweetest French fries around, and the next minute, you're getting the kitchen ready for a fresh new remodel. The first thing you need to remember about any grease fire is water is bad. Yeah, that's right. No to H2O. Water sucks. It really, really sucks. Putting water on a grease fire is like telling your girlfriend that she's too emotional. It's not only going to blow up in your face, but you're probably also going to need to find a new place to live. There seems to be a little hesitation here, putting the fire out, maybe a little staring at it, trying to figure out what's going on. I get it. Maybe not trained, a little bit of lack of knowledge. It happens. But getting fires put out as quickly as possible is probably one of the most important things, because if there's any absolute concrete piece of evidence in firefighting, it's the bigger the fire, the harder it is to put out. Science. And I know what you're saying to yourself right now. You're like, Jason, none of this makes sense. If there's anything that I know, it's water kicks the crap out of fire. So why is it different with grease fires? Let me tell you. You see, liquids have something called density, and unfortunately, oil's density is actually lower than water. So when you toss in that nice cup of H2O into that fiery oil abyss, it helps that nice grease fire rise all the way to the top. And to make things even worse, that grease fire is cooking at a sweet 600 plus degrees, which is well above the boiling temperature of water. So when you toss in that nice cup of agua, it boils instantly, exploding that greasy fire all over the expensive upgrades that you just had installed. And finally, to make sure that this never happens to you in your personal home, I'm going to teach you how to put out a grease fire. But I warn you, learning this technique takes years and years of practice, and only the truly skilled will be able to achieve it. And there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That's how you take care of those pesky grease fires. Just remember, extinguishers are your best friends, and when in doubt, call 911. Because the faster we get there, the faster we put that fire out, the more of your house and mirrors that we're going to help save.
As he mentioned in that video, if that fire is larger than 3 feet, or if you just don't feel that you can tackle it, then it's time to call the fire department. So make sure you always identify the fire extinguisher locations in the kitchen or the establishment where you're working, just so that you can quickly mobilize rather than hesitating. As you saw in that instance, just that short hesitation caused that fire to quadruple in size very, very quickly. Let's look at the different types of extinguishers that we have. So we have air pressurized water, which is generally they are large silver colored extinguishers with water and pressurized air to move that water out in a hurry. They may have detergents in them as well, and they are for tackling Class A fires. Carbon dioxide extinguishers are generally red, and they generally have this horn on them here to help actually to focus that carbon dioxide to the area that you're trying to take care of. They are pressurized carbon dioxide gas that's inside them. Make sure that you have respiratory protection when you're using something like this, because it will create an absence of oxygen, and you need oxygen to survive. Class B and C fires are the types of fires that this extinguisher can handle. A multi-purpose dry chemical extinguisher is generally red, and they have a fire retardant powder inside them. These are for A, B, C, and B and C purposes. And then Class K are kitchen. Remember that one? So this is K chemical. So this one is for taking care of deep fryer fires. So this is either going to be a wet or dry chemical agent that's going to be in here, that's going to create a blanket that goes over the top of that oil to go and snuff that out. So it's very important that you understand where you can find your fire extinguishers and exactly what type they are. They should be clearly and properly labeled. We should make sure that everyone who's employed in that area is trained on what to do with it. And also make sure that you know how to contact the local fire department and how far away the fire department is. You may have to handle something a little more if you're in a more rural area that may take a little longer to get to. When you operate that fire extinguisher, then make sure that you're standing 6 to 8 feet away from the base of that fire, and remember to use the pass system. So this is where you're going to pull the pin, aim at the base, squeeze the trigger, and sweep from side to side. This way you can maximize the capability of that extinguisher, because while that extinguisher may be heavy when you first pick it up, there's only a limited amount of resource that's in there that can actually tackle that fire. Once it's gone, then you are out of luck. It's time to move out. So always check for any damage that could be on those extinguishers. Make sure to replace any that aren't working or that have been used, or if they have an expired date, then make sure that they are inspected and that they are recharged. Those extinguishers have a date on them, and they should be inspected regularly. Make sure that you always have an escape route when you're fighting a fire. If you can't look behind you and see a clear path, then it's not worth taking the time to try and fight that fire. You just need to get out immediately. Now we move on to some systems that are in place. So we have automatic systems. These operate when there's no one present. Automatic sprinklers. They have an early and effective response where if they're heat actuated, then they'll burst the bulb that's on them, and they will spray out gallons of water straight over any fire that's occurring. Then something that we find a lot in our kitchen is what's called an Ansul system. An Ansul system is a rapid response to cooking equipment fires. You can see in the picture right here where we have one of these over our main hood system and then our secondary hood system as well. This is so that these are specifically set up with chemicals which will douse straight down onto a fire, and so being able to put it out much quicker than if you were to try and use an extinguisher or a fire blanket or water or anything else. Let's take a look at it and see exactly how effective they can be.
Steadily heated to the oil's auto-ignition temperature of 350 degrees Celsius. After auto-ignition, the fire was allowed a controlled pre-burn period of 2 minutes 20 seconds before actuation of the Ansul R102 system. Temperatures of the oil and of the air in the plenum were monitored throughout. After the 2 minutes 20 seconds pre-burn, the Ansul R102 system was actuated. The fire was totally suppressed during the R-102's 34-second discharge. Along with immediate suppression of the fire, the Ansul agent formed a stabilized layer on the surface of the oil by the action of saponification. This protective layer prevented any reflashing of the fire. During the first demonstration, the maximum temperature of the oil was recorded at 392 degrees Celsius, and of the plenum at 115 degrees Celsius. For the second test, the same commercially available appliances and hood were used. This time, suppression of the appliance fire was demonstrated by trained firefighters, using a fire blanket and handheld portable extinguishers. After the 2 minutes 20-second pre-burn, the firefighters applied a fire blanket to the fryer. As the fire continues, the firefighters began to apply dry powder from handheld portable extinguishers.
As you can see, the effectiveness of that Ansul system is incredible. And if you ever have something that significant happening in your kitchen, then there's no way that you can personally fight that fire when the fire department will be struggling to take that control. But that Ansul system is specifically set up with exactly the kind of chemicals and exactly the kind of power that's required to get something put out very, very quickly. Smoke detectors and heat detectors are needed all over your establishment. And so these are really important because they need a source of electricity, whether it's battery or if they're actually plugged into the mains power. But they make a loud alarm anytime that they're tripped, whether it's from detecting smoke or heat. And so they should also have a test button on them as well. They should be tested each month just to make sure that they're effectively working. So a smoke detector, it requires some flow of air for it to be able to detect the smoke that's in there. So make sure you don't put them in what we call dead spaces at the end of hallways or between ceiling beams where there isn't any air movement going between them, because otherwise it will take a significantly longer time for them to detect and alert you to any smoke that's happening. There are also some certain local regulatory requirements which can come with those as well. Ionization detectors use a small electrical current that detects small little combustion particles floating in the air, basically from the smoke that's created. Photoelectric detectors actually have a beam of light that runs through inside the detector that reacts to smoke or flame that it detects in the air. Heat detectors detect fire without smoke, so they actually will be looking for a significant increase in temperature. A flame detector is actually able to react to the movement of flames, and so that's what actually sets that off. The fire safety expert must always install and maintain any type of fire detection device that you have in your restaurant or hotel or private club. You must make sure that they are the ones who are licensed and they are the experts in doing this. There's no way that someone who doesn't really know what they're doing can do this effectively and make sure that everyone is kept safe. Some other common fire detection devices are thermostats. These are actually preset with a certain temperature, so that way when this temperature is reached, a metal strip will actually move up, or a disc that closes against an electrical contact, and it sets off the alarm. There are also rate of rise detectors. This is when they detect a certain amount of temperature rise within a minute that will actually set off those alarms. And then we have flame detectors. These are either infrared or ultraviolet sensors that actually detect the movement or radiant energy from the flames. Never try to fight a fire if you're dealing with thick smoke, if it's too hot, or if it's greater than 3 feet, either across or straight up, if it has any hazardous substances involved, or if you're missing the correct extinguisher to be able to deal with the type of fire that you're looking at. What should you do? You should call the fire department. Begin an evacuation of everyone. Turn off any gas valves that you can access. Make sure that you have a pre-assigned meeting place, just like we have at school. Make sure that all the people escape safely, and then make sure that you inform the firefighter if anyone's missing. Never re-enter the building until the fire department tells you that it's safe to do so. This is why in school, when we do any of our evacuations, we'll take the attendants with us, so that way we'll check to make sure everyone made it out safely. We can always replace equipment, buildings, everything else. We can't replace you. One of the biggest injuries that we tend to get in the kitchen are burns. So these can be classified in 3 different ways. So we classify them either as first, second, or third degree. The increase in degree, going from first up to third, refers to the severity of that burn. So a first degree burn is the least serious of all of them. Leaves your skin red. It feels sensitive. You may have some swelling going on there as well. So you can see right over here I have a photograph of a sunburn. A bad sunburn is a first degree burn. What treatment can you have for that? So cool running water. Cover it with wet, cool towels. Do not apply ice. For a second degree burn, this is more serious. There's some intense pain going on with this. You'll quite possibly have blistering going on and swelling in that area as well. The treatment is cool running water. Cover it with wet, cool towels. Do not apply ice, ointment, or bandages to any of this either. And seek medical attention when you have a second degree burn. When we get to third degree burns, as you can see from this image over on the right hand side, the difference is first degree burns is just the very top epidermis. When we get to second degree burns, it goes down into the derma. You're starting to hit on some of our nerve endings right here as well. When we move on to third degree burns, this is very serious. So this is where not only have we burned through this area right here, you can actually see the nerve damage which has occurred here. We're actually going into the fat layer that's underneath the epidermis and the derma layer of your skin. This can be very serious and leave you very open to possibly getting infections afterwards as well. Quite often people who get this kind of burn can actually downplay the type of burn they have because they'll say, well, it doesn't really hurt. This is because you have some nerve damage. You're literally unable to feel how bad that is. Your skin may be white and soft, or maybe black and hard if it's that serious as well. What treatment do we do for third degree burns? This is cool, moist, sterile gauze. Do not remove any burned clothing because it may actually make it worse. It may open up larger wounds. Do not apply any ointments, cold compresses, or any cold water. You must immediately seek medical attention. How can we avoid burns in our kitchen in a general day-to-day pattern of how we work? So this is where you can actually monitor traffic patterns and try and work things out to be more safe in general in your kitchen, especially in a very busy kitchen that has a lot of individuals moving around and a lot of moving parts in them. So make sure anytime you're walking around with anything hot that you warn others coming around hot, right? We warn everyone else as we're coming around so they don't back into you accidentally, or so they don't turn around the corner and suddenly find you've got a large pot of boiling pasta. Make sure you warn other people so that they can move out of your way to prevent that kind of accident. You can also set up one-way traffic patterns in certain areas of your kitchen, especially if you have any tight working areas as well. But make sure that you maintain an adequate working space for everyone to be in, making sure that aisles and doorways are kept clear. You shouldn't have food items stacked up in boxes, taking up space where they should be in storage. Otherwise, it could be that people either can't escape from a fire, or people may trip over those as they're carrying hot items around in the kitchen. But always respect heat. Make sure that you're assuming that heat sources are on, and use dry hot pads or oven mitts and towels to take things in and out of the oven. Never try and use one that's slightly moist or damp, because that heat will come roaring through right in the middle of where you're trying to hold on to that hot food. As we noticed on that video of the deep fryer, how quickly this kind of thing can get out of control. But deep fryers can work very effectively, and they can be very safe as long as we operate them carefully and understand the do's and don'ts of that deep fryer. So make sure you dry off any food. So when we make fresh French fries, we make sure that the water that they're stored in to leach off all that starch so they don't stick to each other, that we drain that off. We shake any of the excess of that water off. Or if you have frozen items, make sure you shake off any excess ice crystals that might be on that food too. The fryer baskets should never be more than half full when they're lowered down into that oil. Always follow the manufacturer's directions on how to carefully and safely and effectively work that piece of equipment. Always stand away from any splashing grease. Never lean over a fryer, because that heat can be intense, and if it's splattering up at all from whatever's gone into it, it could get you straight in the face or straight into your upper torso. Make sure that you lower and raise those baskets carefully too. No need to splash boiling oil around in the kitchen and possibly get it on the floor and making a slip hazard as well. Make sure that you place draining receptacles close to the fryer so you're not dripping across the floor as you're trying to take that fryer basket out. And always use long-handled tongs to handle foods that have been frying, because they're quite possibly around about 300 degrees when they're coming out of that fryer. They can be very hot. Steam-based equipment can be very dangerous, but very effective if it's used carefully. Always check steam and steam table contents carefully. Check any pressure gauges that are on there as well. Release any pressure before you open. And always keep your face away from escaping steam. Any dining room steam equipment, like you can see in the picture here, should always have signs on there. Make sure you use long-handled serving utensils. Sometimes even using ones that have insulated handles are best if customers are personally going to be using them as well. Let's take a look now at a piece of steam equipment we have in our kitchen that is very effective at cooking. It's quite easy to clean the machine as well, but it can be very dangerous if it's not carefully used. Okay, so we're in full cleaning mode now. So we're working on our Combi oven over here. We've got the oven cleaner. We preheated the oven up to about 200 degrees. And now we're actually going to start applying the product in there and running it through its cleaning cycle. Here we go. So we have a lot of burned on grease and dirt from over time, and so we're going to be spraying this all throughout just to make sure we cover all of it, all the shelves, all the racks. You can instantly see where that grease is starting to break down. We're going to give this about 5 minutes for it to sit and do its magic, and then we're going to send it through its cleaning cycle. So as we can see, there is some of the grease is starting to break down. So we need to program our Combi oven here to be able to go through the cleaning cycle. So first, we get the chef button, and we're going to click over one to our cleaning, and hit the chef button again. Cleaning, yes. Hit the chef button again. Now it's going to go through a 10-minute cycle, first of all, and that's one of two. And then when it hits the second part, then we'll actually start seeing some action going on in the actual oven itself as it does a self-clean. Now, with everything looking much cleaner, I can see through the window again. There is a little debris on the bottom. I switched off the oven at the breaker box, but if you take our sprayer now, we can actually spray down any residual little bits, and we can knock those out. With these seals going around the edges to make them live longer, we will also take some mild detergent, regular kind of detergent that you would use to clean dishes, and we'll go around those. We go around those more frequently, though, just to keep them as clean and clear as possible of grease that can actually make them start corroding and breaking down early. Then you've got a good clean oven square to work with. When we operate a dishwasher, we also have to operate that safely, making sure that you're loading in the dirties over on one side. Be aware that there's steam and hot water coming through from that side. And when the plates and things come over from the opposite side, making sure obviously we've got clean hands to not contaminate over on the clean side. But those plates and various different pieces that are coming through are going to be very hot on the other side. You need to make sure you protect yourself on the other side too. When we serve guests in our dining room, we have to make sure that we warn them of certain things. If you have hot items like hot plates, then you have to make sure you warn them. If there's a hot interior to the food that may not be fully expected, maybe like a pie, let them know just how hot that is. If you have a hot cup of coffee or something like that you're serving, then make sure that you either hold the cup or make sure that it's sitting on the table so that as you're filling it up, you're not going to have the possibility of a person moving their hand that's holding that coffee and splashing it onto them. Don't ever feel the need to fill any of these beverages to the rim. Always leave a little gap there so that it allows for the possibility of avoiding a spill. So preventing slips, trips, and falls. How do we go about this?
There are many ways to help prevent common slips, trips, and falls. Most slips, trips, and falls occur on three types of surfaces: steps, floors, and the pavement outside the building. These types of accidents usually occur while people are paying attention to something else as they walk, talking to companions, carrying objects, or simply daydreaming. The best way to protect guests and coworkers is to anticipate what might happen outside or inside the operation. Outside of the operation, begin by checking areas for weather hazards such as snow, ice, flooding, standing puddles, or oil slicks. Next, remove debris such as garbage or tree branches, especially after storms or high winds, from exterior areas including sidewalks and ramps. Repair potholes or other damage to the pavement, sidewalks, or ramps as soon as possible. It's a best practice to schedule routine maintenance to make sure the parking lot is safe for both guests and employees. Next, make sure there is adequate lighting for the parking lot and outdoor walkways. Don't forget to repair and replace bulbs that are burned out. Finally, keep exterior stairways clear of boxes, bags, and equipment, and repair them immediately if any problem occurs. Inside the operation, keep an eye on grease and oil on floors, a major cause of slips and falls. Always clean floors thoroughly at least once a day, usually after the operation closes. Next, keep floor coverings like carpets, rugs, mats, and runners clean and in good shape. Make sure that these coverings are smooth and fit tightly to the floor. Rugs and runner edges should be unfrayed, securely bound, and free of holes or tears, especially at the seams. Look to see that non-skid floor mats are in place in areas that often get wet or slippery, such as entrances, aisles, and food preparation and serving areas. To prevent slips, always clean floors and carpets right away whenever a spill occurs. Make sure to verbally warn guests and employees, block the area, post a caution wet floor sign, and direct people around the spill. Remember that while quick service is important, hurrying can cause accidents. So be sure to watch for chairs or tables sticking into aisles. Make sure there is at least 4 feet of space in the aisles of serving and dining areas. If your operation has steps or raised dining areas, mark them clearly for guests. Also, keep them free of any clutter and help those guests who may need assistance to move up and down steps. Last tip to prevent slips, trips, and falls. Do not run or fool around on restaurant premises. It might be tempting, but it's just not safe. Remember, most slips, trips, and falls are preventable. Pay attention to your surroundings and try to assist coworkers and guests in stopping injuries before they occur.
As we mentioned there, the three surface types inside and outside the establishment that are most likely to cause accidents are steps, floors, and pavement. So people generally just not paying attention, carrying objects, daydreaming. We need to make sure we anticipate what might happen to safeguard the public in general. As you can see with this beautiful staircase, what could possibly go wrong, right? So we need to make sure that we identify these kinds of issues that could happen ahead of time. When we look at our exterior, we can check for things like weather hazards, if we can warn our customers and our employees, remove any debris that may be about to cause a problem, repair potholes like we see in the pavement right here, make sure that we have adequate lighting, make sure we schedule routine maintenance of certain things like our lighting as well to make sure that people can see where they're going. Make sure you clean sidewalks and ramps and keep stairways clear. Interior areas, make sure that the floors are clean, that they're grease-free. Make sure that you clean and maintain any kind of floor coverings. Make sure that rugs and runner edges don't curl up, as we can see right here in this picture here, because these can trip people over very easily. Always make sure that you use non-skid floor mats as well. Always clean up spills immediately. Use a wet floor sign to warn people. They should be this bright yellow color so that they're really obvious. Make sure you clear any aisles, mark steps and raised dining areas, and do not allow people to fool around. When you fool around whether it's in the kitchen or the front of the house, that's when we can create danger. When we're looking at ladders, we have to be very careful. Heights can be very dangerous. So for racks and shelves that are higher than shoulder level, we should be using a ladder or some kind of a step stool or a step ladder to be able to access those points to safely put things up and take them back down again. So a straight ladder should reach 3 feet above the spot where the top of the ladder rests against the support. Step ladders and step stools, we should not be using those to step on that top step. They're not designed for that. They lose their balance when you're stepping that high. The center of gravity is far too high. Make sure that you're not reaching above your shoulders if you're using this type of ladder. If you have to, then that means that you're reaching up too high. Always use ladders safely, so making sure that we inspect them regularly. Make sure that they're right for the specific job that you're going to use them for. Make sure they're kept in good condition. They are rated by weight, so make sure that if you weigh, say, 200 pounds, and you're carrying something that weighs another 40 pounds to put up on a shelf, but that ladder is only rated for less than 200 pounds, it could fail with you halfway up it. They should be labeled correctly. They generally come that way from the factory. Make sure that label isn't ever peeled off so that people can identify if it's the correct one for the correct job. They should always have non-skid feet so they don't move around too easily either. Two people are always best to work together when you use those ladders. One person can hold the bottom, the other person can climb up, and they can pass between themselves, either coming up or down from that ladder to keep everyone safe. Some important tips to bear in mind when you use ladders. So work with someone, like we mentioned. Keep away from overhead obstacles. And that includes possible power lines and other things that could be detrimental to your health as well. Keep that ladder firmly lodged on a firm, flat, clean surface so it won't slide. Do not make the ladder taller than it should be, and make sure that that things are easy to reach from where you are. Don't ever try and lean too far over. Make sure that you actually move that ladder rather than reaching too far. And lock the folding bar in as well, so that way it can't fold up while you're up the top of it. Test the ladder's balance before you get up. Make sure that you place metal ladders in an appropriate location. Make sure there's no electrical sources around them that they could become electrified. Lock doors near the ladder, because if you're up that ladder and you're right next to a door and someone swings that door open quickly, you may be coming down. Make sure that you use one hand to steady yourself while you're actually picking things up and putting them down from that ladder as well. Don't lean or stretch too far when you're working on that ladder. And do not ever stand up on the top two rungs, because otherwise you're up in the area where that center of gravity is too high and you could end up coming down. Make sure that when you put the ladder away that it's put back safe and secure so that it's only going to be used by the right people to do the right jobs. Now let's take a look at how we can prevent back injuries when we're lifting and carrying things. Some of the things we have in our kitchen can be rather heavy.
Working in the restaurant industry can be very demanding, so it's important to protect one of your precious resources, your back. Always use safe techniques to lift and carry heavy items. And remember to think through the process from start to finish for every item, every time. Before lifting and carrying an item, decide your plan of attack, how you are going to get from point A to point B with the item. Stand close to the item you're lifting. Your feet should be shoulder width apart, and put one foot just slightly in front of the other. Next, make sure you're standing straight and facing the item. It's important to bend at the knees, not your waist. Lower your body using your leg muscles to reach the item. Look for a place on the item to place your whole hand, not just your fingers. Test the item to make sure it's not too heavy or unbalanced. Ask for help if you think it is too much to handle for one person. Once you've found a spot to place your hands, straighten out your wrists, tighten your stomach muscles, and align your back. Arch your lower back by pulling your shoulders back, then stick out your chest as you push up from under the item using the power from your leg muscles. Immediately transfer the weight of the item to your legs as you slowly stand upright. Hold the item close to your body with elbows tucked in. Now that the lifting part is over, you are carrying the item. Make sure not to twist or bend when lifting and carrying. Focus on taking the item from point A to point B. When you've reached point B, or the destination, carefully lower the item. Keep your lower back pulled in by tightening the stomach muscles, and remember to keep the weight on your legs. Bend at your knees as you lower the item down as smoothly as you possibly can. Touch one corner of the item down first, then you can move your hands out of the way as you lower the rest of the item. Don't let your fingers get caught underneath it. A few other things to remember when lifting and carrying. Always wear sturdy, non-skid shoes with the laces tied tight to prevent tripping. Also, don't wear loose clothing. You don't want it to catch on the item or on a nearby object and throw off your balance. That's just a recipe for disaster. You can always ask others for help or use a hand truck, dolly, or cart to make carrying heavy items from point A to point B a little easier. Making sure you lift and carry items the right way will save you from injury. Not only will your back thank you, but your manager will too.
So preventing back injuries by storing heavy items at waist level or below, putting lighter objects up on the top shelves, up on the higher shelves, makes it just that little bit easier and less likely that you're going to get injured. Labeling extra heavy objects as well, just so that people are warned to be safe with them. Always wearing sturdy, non-skid shoes is important. Don't wear any loose clothing that can get caught into machinery. Check the item's weight before you go to pick it up. Look for handholds if there's an easier way of holding, especially if there's something that's kind of awkward. And make sure you wear gloves as well if it's something that's significant. It can help you to grip on better. Always check the balance of an item when you're picking it up. Ask for help if you need it. Use hand trucks and dollies or carts. Make your own life a little easier. And use the proper lifting techniques that we saw in that video as well. The same principles that we applied to actually picking up large loads can be applied to carrying those loads as well. make sure you plan your route as you're going so that you're not going to be held up by something, or that you're not going to be in a dangerous place with doors slamming on you or anything like that as you're trying to get through. When you carry trays, like one of these large service trays, have one hand in front and one in the middle underneath, and always use a tray stand so that way you have somewhere to place it down safely and sturdy so that nothing's going to topple over. Now let's take a little look at first aid.
First aid refers to medical treatment given to an injured person either for light injuries or until more complete treatment can be provided by emergency service or other healthcare providers. Common restaurant and food service injuries requiring first aid include minor heat burns, chemical burns, cuts, sprains, and muscle cramps. For minor first-degree burns, start by running cold water over the burned area for 5 minutes, or until less painful. Cover the burn with a sterile gauze bandage. The gauze should be wrapped loosely to avoid pressure on the burn area. Don't apply ointment. It can prevent proper healing. An over-the-counter pain reliever can help to take some of the sting out. For chemical burns, flush the chemicals causing the burn off the skin surface with cool running water for 20 minutes. Remove items such as clothing or jewelry that might have been contaminated by the chemical. Then apply a cool, wet cloth to relieve pain. Wrap the burned area loosely with a dry, sterile dressing, and make sure your tetanus booster is up to date in order to avoid infection. For cuts and scrapes, begin by stopping the bleeding. Apply pressure to the area with a clean cloth. Clean the wound with clean water. Apply antibiotic cream or ointment to keep the wound moist. Next, cover the wound with a bandage to prevent bacteria from getting in. Be sure to change the bandage once a day, or when it becomes wet or dirty. And watch for signs of infection, redness, pain, drainage, warmth, or swelling. First aid for sprains and strains includes rest, ice, compression, and elevation, or RICE for short. R is for resting the injured part of the body. I is for ice. Apply ice or a cold compress for 10 to 15 minutes at a time every few hours for the first 48 hours after injury to prevent swelling. C is for compression. Wear an elastic compression bandage for at least 48 hours to reduce swelling. And E is for elevate. Keep the injured part elevated above the level of the heart to reduce swelling. For muscle cramping, begin by massaging the affected muscle to relieve tension. Then apply a cold compress or heat therapy. And you may want to take an over-the-counter pain reliever. A good first aid program requires equipment, training, a concerned attitude for the injured, and a thorough follow-up. But always remember, accidents can be prevented, and accidents have serious results.
So as we saw in that video there, first aid is where we're giving medical treatment, but just for light injuries. This is important that we don't get ahead of ourselves. Because if we do, we could be treating something which we're just not equipped for. So we're just there to make sure we start taking care of any issues that have occurred, try and take care of any emotional or medical needs that we possibly can, and diffuse any of that shock and anger and resentment that an individual may have towards the company if they got sick or were injured in your establishment, just to try and diffuse any of that so that when you actually have emergency medical care arrive, then hopefully the situation is a little more calm and collected. So first aid programs require equipment, so things like first aid kits, an AED, or an automatic external defibrillator. It also requires training. So we have the American Heart Association, the Red Cross. These types of organizations perform training in companies' work sites and also at their sites where you can go to them as well. It's always a great thing to be able to take advantage of training like this, not just to be at work, but for your own personal life as well, knowing that you can help a loved one if someone has an issue that comes up. It's always good, if you're a first aider, to have a concerned attitude. Never just blow people off. Always be there to assist and be concerned for them, but helpful to them. And always doing a good, thorough follow-up as well. Written documentation at the company level is a good thing to have, because memories start to fade on what happened and when they happened. It's good to be able to write these things down. So managers have responsibilities which include employees and guest safety, and we also have to look at how we can prevent accidents from happening in the first place. Accidents can have some serious results. So we should have a good, well-stocked, fresh and up-to-date first aid kit within easy reach of any area in your establishment. So that would mean both the front of house and the back of house, and if there are offices for any office staff, that they would all need to make sure they have easy access to that first aid kit. If you have a delivery truck or something like that for catering, you have to make sure you have first aid kits available there too. When it comes to handling injuries, generally companies will have specific policies on how this is done and what should happen after that injury occurs. Almost always it would be necessary to notify a manager of any injury that happened as soon as possible. Make sure that you offer assistance, but make sure that we're reporting all of the facts that happened and any witnesses that were there to actually see the incident happening too. When it comes to minor burns, first-degree burns, we talked about that. You want to cool that burn. You want to cover it and then just take an over-the-counter pain relief just to try and help the pain and swelling possibly to go down as well. When it comes to chemical burns, you want to remove the cause of that burn. Whatever that chemical is, and if it's splashed onto the actual clothing as well, you may have to remove that too. Make sure to remove any contaminated items from that area and apply cool, wet cloths to that area as well. Wrap up the burn and make sure you have a current tetanus booster if needed. When it comes to cuts and scrapes, you have to stop the bleeding. The way you generally do this, you actually wrap that bleeding area up, and you need to place pressure on it and raise that above your heart level as well. Make sure you clean that wound. Apply any antibiotic or antiseptic cream or ointment to it and cover the wound so that it's all sealed in there. Make sure that those bandages are changed regularly because you want to watch out for any infection that can occur. When it comes to sprains and strains, you need to rest that injured part of the body. Apply ice and wear a compression bandage. Say if it's a leg, then you can get a compression bandage that you pull over it that holds it in place, so it immobilizes it partially, but also it can help to minimize swelling to happen as well and keep it elevated. Use the rice thought process: rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Muscle cramps can be very painful. You can massage those, apply cold compresses or heat to it, and just take over-the-counter pain relievers for it as well. There are so many different emergency situations that can come up, but you need to make sure that you have your employees trained to deal with as many of them as possible. Things like foodborne illness outbreaks, employees with contagious illness, on-site injuries, restaurant vehicle accidents, loss of power, water, or other utilities, fires, floods, storms and earthquakes, and armed robberies. These can all occur, and you need to make sure that you have a preparation in place so that way employees know what to do. In addition to knowing first aid medical procedures, it's good to be able to show concern to the person you're caring for. Stay calm, and this can sometimes be very difficult to do, but it will help to calm the whole situation. It will help the patient to stay calm as well, which is vital. And it also helps when you help them to deal with shock and disorientation, which can happen when someone has a serious injury or illness occur to them. Look at a couple of different things that you would be trained in if you did first aid, AED, and CPR training. So that's CPR is one of them, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So this helps to restore breathing and heartbeats in people. And then the Heimlich maneuver, or abdominal thrust, as they're also sometimes called. This helps to remove food from an airway that's stuck in the airway. An employee training or poster should be posted about this. Make sure if you're going to do this, though, that you are trained and certified in first aid so you don't injure that person too. Training and certification can be done by organizations, as I mentioned, like the American Heart Association and the Red Cross and various others, which are very happy to come into your place of business to train you, or you can go to them to be trained. So renewal needs to be done regularly, sometimes yearly, sometimes every other year, depending upon what that training involved. At least one manager on every shift in your organization should be first aid, CPR, and AED trained, so that way you have that coverage to make sure that people are as safe as possible. So various different external threats can occur in our establishment too. Arson and theft are two significant ones. So arson is when you have deliberate and malicious burning of property. So good fire safety and security processes are good to have that can eliminate the opportunities for these types of crime to occur. Always keep back doors locked and alarmed. Keep external refrigeration locked at all times as well. Reduce the risk of robbery, prevent thefts. Lock and alarm doors and windows. This reduces the risk of intruders, limiting loss from robbery, and prevents property damage as well. Develop and implement security policies and procedures. Always review those policies and procedures with the employees. If you have policies and procedures and no one knows them because they're locked away in a book somewhere in the vault, then they will never be carried out. Make sure that you train everyone in those when they first come on board and practice those security measures so that everyone knows what they should be doing. To make sure that food is safe, control access to food supplies as well. You don't want to allow people to come in who are imposters, saying that they might be an electrician or a repair person, when really they're there to contaminate your food or something like that. Always make sure that all of your employees have uniforms and name tags, use safety badges. This way, if someone has access, then you can actually give them a badge to show that they're supposed to be on site. If they're not wearing that badge that you have for them, and you should question that person. Are you supposed to be here? And ask what their business is there, because they could be in there trying to cause harm. There are so many different aspects that we have to understand and to be able to learn and then actually activate when we're trying to take workplace safety seriously. This is just the beginning now, and when you get a job, when you go in there, you should look for these types of things. During your first few weeks working in an establishment, they should be training you in all of the safety features that they have, whether it's in the front of house or back of house, or even in an office. You should learn all of those different procedures. If they don't tell you all of them, then make sure you ask about them. You want to be as safe as you can possibly be, let alone keeping all your customers and fellow employees safe as well. I hope you learned a lot of things on here. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me, and I will see you in the kitchen. Cheers.